Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is education. On the conversation on education this week, I want to talk about the obligation to dissent. And not all of us know what this means, but this means that if there is a topic that you're in discussion with, that if there is something that feels wrong, that is wrong, that you think would be a huge risk or a huge issue with the thing that you're working with, that you should say something. You should raise your hand, you should say something about it. And so this was a concept that I was made familiar with when I was doing my MBA. I went to Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto, where we often had networking events with the Big Four and the Big Three consulting firms. And so one of the Big Three consulting firms, one of their biggest mandates was this obligation to dissent. And so it's really, if there is a business project or it's a concept or a solution that they were putting together, and as you were listening to the solution, something really didn't feel right, or you felt there was a blind spot, that it was really your obligation as being in the room, like you having the privilege of having a seat in that room, meant you had to say something if there was something that felt off. And even if it didn't translate as anything, like even if they still went in that direction, at least they could explore the risks that you brought up. And so I find it so interesting that in business context where the stakes are very, very high, we want to hear everyone's opinion. Like everyone who has a seat at that table, we want to hear their point of view. But a lot of us in day-to-day life, we're taught just the opposite. We're taught that if something doesn't look right, then keep your mouth shut. Like unless you know exactly what you're talking about, like there's more risks associated with speaking up than with staying silent. And that can't be true anymore. I don't think it was ever true, but even now more than ever, it's not. And I want to really introduce this concept of the obligation to dissent to my podcast and to this YouTube channel, because I think that it's an important concept to grasp. Because I think that if you recognize that wherever it is that you go, for you to have the privilege of being in that room, there are people who would love to be in spaces that you occupy. Not everyone is going to have the opportunity to do the things that you're doing in life, in your profession, in your career, so on and so forth. So if you have that opportunity to do it, recognize that your know-how, your insight, your intuition, whatever it is that you bring to the table, it matters. And so you have an obligation to dissent. If something doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, then you need to speak up. And of course, there's a way to do it. You need to learn how to read the room. You need to pick your timing, but you need to use your voice. And so I am someone who works in project management, and with so many different moving pieces, working with so many different people who have hats and expertises in different domains, for me it's incredibly important that anyone who's working on a project with me, who's working on a team with me, feels comfortable speaking up, feels comfortable dissenting, feels comfortable pushing back and challenging my point of view if they don't agree. And I welcome that. I will always welcome it, because it's important. We as intellectuals, as people who, as knowledge miners, as people who kind of work in the knowledge industry, that we share that knowledge and that we cover each other's blind spots. And that's the one thing I love most about working in a multidisciplinary setting where you have so many different expertises coming together to build an impactful solution. You're only going to build impact if you really take into account the value that every person brings to the table. And it's important that you recognize, and that the people around you recognize, that you value their voice and you value their seat at the table. And so I have this mandate ingrained in me. Like I know that if I'm in a room, if I have privilege being in a room, then I always have an obligation to dissent. If there's something that doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, I'm going to speak up. I know how to speak up. Like I'm not there to rattle cages. I'm not a contrarian. Like I'm not someone who's going to be devil's advocate just because. But if I do have a concern and I raise it because I think someone in the room, some expert in the room, is going to have the solution or the answer, or it's going to really be something that we're all going to pause on, reflect on, and come back to figure out how we mitigate against it. But we're not going to find ways to create contingencies if we're not speaking up. So how does this translate in life? This translates in life because the obligation to dissent is everyone's responsibility. It is something that everyone should have been taught, even in elementary school. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but we can start where we are right now. And so I'm going to give you maybe 3 key things that if they come up in your life, you have an obligation to dissent. You have an obligation to speak up. And so one of the things that I think that is really important, and it will probably impact relationship, of course, and I think all cases where you have an obligation to dissent is going to create ripples, even if you do it the best way possible. Like when you're dissenting a mainstream idea or a convention, when you're dissenting a norm or a direction, then there's going to be rustled feathers. So you want to always be diplomatic and mindful about your approach, but it doesn't mean that it's not still going to create certain friction points, right? But in our personal lives where there's an obligation to dissent is if you see someone in your life who you think who matters to you making the wrong choices for themselves. If they're making, when I say the wrong choices, like this isn't really a moral judgment, it's just that you see that they're doing things that are a bit self-destructive, like they're doing things that are not going to help them in the short term or in the long term, or they're associating people who are not going to help them in the short term or in the long term. And some people don't have like a long-term vision. Like I am someone who is a very long-term thinker when it comes to who I interact with and how I interact with people as well. And I'm not someone who is interested in like wasting my time or liaising or kind of rubbing shoulders with people who don't have things that they're working towards. Like I'm so passion oriented that like I need to be around people who are passionate as well. Like not just people who are kind of there existing. Like I need to be around people who are trying, who are pushing, who have goals that they're pushing towards. Because that's the way I'm oriented, I also think that I'm probably a little bit too much for someone who is a little bit more chill. I don't have chill. I don't like to hang out with people who do have chill for the most part. I think we operate on very different wavelengths, but in all cases, if I see that someone who I care about is starting to engage in self-destructive behaviors or starting to interact with people who I feel like are a little bit like not the best vibe, like they don't seem to have good intentions for them, I'm not going to just sit and watch the train wreck happen, right? Like I'm not going to sit there, pull out popcorn and see how everything unfolds. Like if this is someone who I am acquainted to, have a relationship with, or have a friendship with, if I see that they're engaging in destructive behaviors, I have an obligation to dissent. I have an obligation to say something. They are not obligated, and no one is obligated to listen to you, but you are obligated. It is your moral and I think civil duty to say something when you see something is up. That is the first scenario where I would say the cards may fall where they may, but you gotta speak up. A second reason why I think that we have an obligation to dissent is as informed citizens. Not all of us know how to really operate in an environment or communal setting where we're the ones really carrying the weight of the decisions that we're making. Like when we're making our votes for the politicians who are in office, like there's a lot of implications to that vote. There's a lot of implications to aligning to someone's political agenda. If you haven't really been given the tools to think critically about those kinds of choices, then it can be really difficult to make an informed choice. All to say, we all have it within us. We all have the tools, resources that are at our disposal to make informed choices about the people that we align ourselves to. And so when it comes to local politics, like politics that are specific to the countries that we live in and are adjacent to, then it's really important that we use our voice, that we speak up. And so that can be done in so many different ways, right? Like it can be done through voting, it can be done through protesting, through activism, through non-profit, through volunteering. Like there's so many different ways that we can use our voice so that our agenda is known, so that our convictions are known, and so that the things that we value are transpiring and translating in our settings in our society. I think it's just one thing to have like an armchair philosophical debate about the things that we think matter in this world, and of course like we should have those debates, those things inspire change and movement and momentum, but at some point there needs to be a transition where we're not just talking about the things that we know would make society better, we're doing those things. And Project Purpose is me trying to do one of those things. And even if I'm speaking out into the ether and no one hears me, I am doing my moral and civil duty by putting the information out there. You know, take what you want, leave what you don't want. I'm putting the information out there because I recognize and I carry the belief, the value that it is my moral and civil duty to take what it is that I know about the world that I live in and share that information for the people who might not know better. Because when we know better, we do better. And so that is important. And also I think that it expands further to global citizenship. When things are happening around the world where it is a problem for you, like these are not things that you're comfortable having happen. Like we don't all need to be the activists on the boat on the Summit Flotilla going to Gaza to have a way to support what's going on, or even where some of the, I think there's been school shootings happening in the States. Like we don't have to be local to the States to try to align ourselves in a way where we're supporting the people who are trying to make things better. Or even in Sudan, like it's so easy to fall into this learned helplessness. And I say that because I myself often find myself spiraling into learned helplessness when I hear about all these atrocities that people are experiencing. But then I tell myself, like, I don't need to be doing the biggest thing to be doing something that matters. I don't need to be like taking my life, putting it on the back burner and being on that flotilla, delivering humanitarian resources to support in one way, shape, or form. Like all of us have a role to play. And I think that it's so easy to discredit the role that we could potentially play if we're not playing the biggest role in the arena, but every role counts. And so I think that on a global scale, all of us are global citizens. I think all of us are, you know, we belong to this human experience. We're all attached based on the human experience that we're having. So if there's something happening on a global scale and you're not quite sure what you want to do or how you can make an impact, try anything, right? Try anything. I just sent an email out hoping that that would inspire some sort of involvement in the humanitarian aid in Gaza or even in Sudan. I mean, like, I want more than lip service, and I think that it's really important that when it is the case that we want more than lip service, it's not that we're putting ourselves in harm's way. We have resources, we have communities, we have entire movements that we can leverage or anchor on to try to get a consensus and to try to get action taking around the things that matter to us, because I'm sure that if it matters to us, it matters to other people as well. And so I want to come in here and talk about this obligation to dissent. And while I gave 3 examples as to when I myself feel personally obliged to dissent, if it's something in my personal circle, my personal life, is this something that it impacts my local community? And by local community for me, like, even though I live here in Portugal, like, I'm still in the know about how Canada is interacting or aligning to things happening on a global stage. And so for me, it matters that they are showing up in a way that matters to me, like they're showing up in a way that aligns to my Canadian liberal values. And so I will engage in a way where that counts. But I feel that I'm part of this global community, especially because I live and work abroad. Like, I feel more, I think, associated to this global identity, like recognizing that things that happen around the world, like, we're somehow, like, as a Canadian, there's no way that Canada isn't implicated in it. And so me as a Canadian abroad, like, how do I represent Canada away from home? Like, how do I show up in a way where people recognize Canadian ideals in the way that I speak, in the way that I interact, in the way that I choose to align to issues taking place here in Europe or around or in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in Gaza? And it's just interesting because there are so many things that as a Canadian, if you're in Canada, you just don't have any periphery to. You just don't know that it's happening. But when you're abroad, then you see more. And when you see more, you want to do more. And when you want to do more, you need to really think about, like, how do I make sure that I'm moving in a way where I'm maximizing the return on my investment of time? Like, how do I make sure that I'm really doing what I can to create impact and to create influence? And so that's what I've been trying to do. I think that's what this talk is really about, like, recognizing that we all have an obligation to do something, anything, about the things that rub us the wrong way, about the things that we see in our environment that we don't think are right, about the things that are happening locally in our communities or globally around the world. Like, all of us have a voice, all of us have a say, and all of us should definitely use our voice to say something and to do something that contributes for the better good of everyone. So that's what I wanted to come on here and say, some food for thought for you. If I have piqued your interest, and I do suggest that you take a look at our website. We do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future, so definitely check that out. And if you do see yourself, like, if you like it and you see yourself participating in these live events, like, on an ongoing basis, then we do also have package plans that give you the opportunity to save your money on those live event tickets. Now, we do also provide parent-child workshops. We think that leadership starts at a young age, and we should start at a young age. And so our philosophy is that leadership is built in 4 pillars, and those 4 pillars are cultivating a very strong sense of self-concept, autonomy, self-efficacy, and compassion. And so those are the 4 modules that we've put together, available for you to complete within the leisure of your home at your own pace with your child. So check that out. And here on this website, we are on the road to 1K. So definitely, if you are still here, follow us. Every follow helps so much. Leave a like. Join us on our website. You can subscribe to our website as well. We do send out emails and newsletters to stay in touch and keep our community connected. And I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.